the record button, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Well, hello and welcome to the USO in Manchester during World War II, presented by the Manchester Historic Association. My name is Kathy Arnold and I am your host for today's presentation. Working with me are Kathy Hoey, who is monitoring the chat, and Kat Pregoff, who is doing registration. We are all AARP New Hampshire volunteers. Please note that today's presentation is being recorded. AARP has been promoting the health and well-being of older Americans for over 60 years. Here in New Hampshire, AARP staff and volunteers work together to help make our community a friendly, livable place to work, play, and explore for people of all ages. AARP works closely with community stakeholders to make our community an even better place to live. Additionally, we strive to bring you informative, innovative, and fun virtual events like today's presentation as a means of connection and inclusion. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. To eliminate background noise, please be sure to mute your microphone. You are on mute if your microphone has a line through it. We'd love to hear from you today though, so please use the chat box, which can be accessed by clicking the chat button, and type your questions or comments where it says type message here. Kathy will be monitoring the chat and raising your questions and comments throughout the program. You are welcome to appear on or off camera, but again, we are recording today's presentation. So if you don't want your video camera on, just click on the video camera icon to be sure it has a line through it. Finally, we'd encourage you to rename yourself so we recognize you in the chat. To do this, move your cursor into the upper right corner of your own image and click on the three dots, click rename. Using just your first name is fine. We are pleased today to introduce our presenter, Jeff Berekloff, who is the new Executive Director of the Manchester Historic Association. He has extensive experience in the museum and historical field, having previously worked at the Adams National Historic Park, New England Historic Genealogical Society, and as Director of Operations of the Manchester Historic Association for 10 years. He most recently served as Executive Director of the Moffett Ladd House and Garden in Portsmouth. Jeff is also an adjunct faculty member at Gordon College, currently serves as President of the New Hampshire Heritage Museum Trail, and is on the board of the Association of Historical Societies of New Hampshire. Jeff lives with his wife and 3 children in Pelham, New Hampshire. So we welcome you, Jeff. You can take it away.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And welcome. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you to the AARP for providing this opportunity. The Manchester Historic Association is an organization that was organized in 1896. We've been around for 125 years with a mission to collect, preserve, and share the history of Manchester. To that end, we operate 2 facilities, the Mill Yard Museum on Bedford Street in the old Amoskeag Mill Yard in Manchester, and our research center on Amherst Street in downtown Manchester. I am thrilled to be here today with you to talk about the USO in Manchester during World War II. To start this program, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the USO in general, and then we'll go specifically into the USO's activities in Manchester during World War II. And the origins of this program and this talk came from oral history interviews that volunteers at the Manchester Historic Association did with several women who were involved with the USO during this time period. And these interviews were done now about 15 to 20 years ago but we're very fortunate to have been able to conduct these interviews and have these oral histories that really give us firsthand accounts into some of these experiences and how the USO worked and what their experiences were. So to start, the USO is the acronym for the United Services Organization. This was founded in 1941 as a national organization, and it began in 1940 with war on the horizon. America's military was growing rapidly, and so President Franklin Delano Roosevelt challenged 6 private organizations, national organizations, to handle on-leave recreational needs for the members of the armed forces. So basically providing activities and programs for members of our armed services when they were on leave. These organizations pooled their resources, and in 1941, the USO, United Services Organizations, was incorporated in New York State. President Roosevelt became the first USO honorary chairman, and that is a position that's been accepted by every president since who has followed. The USO served as an umbrella organization that guided these and other charitable organizations to create and run USO operations in local communities. These original 6 organizations were the YMCA, the YWCA, the National Catholic Community Service, the National Jewish Welfare Board, the Travelers Aid Association, and the Salvation Army. Early in 1941, the entertainment industry helped the USO start its popular camp shows to bring live entertainment to the troops at bases within the United States. And I think this is probably what most people think of when they think of the USO. With America's entry into World War II, the shows expanded to bring live entertainment to Americans who were fighting overseas. And of course, here is probably the most famous of the US entertainers, Bob Hope. He made his first tour in 1942 and continued his involvement with the USO for more than 50 years. The USO show concept has endured to this day and is now known as USO Celebrity Entertainment. After a period of decline, the USO was revitalized in the 1970s with new programs and new services for a changing military population. In 1977, USO headquarters were relocated from New York to Washington, D.C., which helped to underscore its role as a national agency that served the armed forces. By 1979, the 6 founding agencies had all withdrawn, leaving the USO as an independent organization. That year, President Jimmy Carter signed the USO Congressional Charter into law. Today, the USO is a private nonprofit charitable organization whose mission is to support the troops by providing welfare and recreation type services. While times have changed, the USO mission remains the same as it was in the beginning, to boost the morale of service members and serve as a link between them and the American people. The style of the USO today is the same as it was throughout its history, to extend a touch of home to the military, basically providing a home away from home. Today, the USO delivers its programs and services to 1.4 million active duty service members and 1.2 million National Guard and Reserves, as well as their families at more than 130 centers located worldwide. Among the services that the modern USO provides are internet and email access, housing, and emergency assistance. And of course, the USO still provides entertainment for troops around the world. It is supported by donations from the public and volunteerism. So now we're going to get into the details of how the USO operated locally here in Manchester during the war, World War II, and immediately afterwards. From 1941 to 1946, the USO had an extensive program in Manchester to serve thousands of soldiers, both men and women, who were stationed at Grenier Army Airfield, which is now the Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. It also served the spouses and families of these soldiers, as well as local service people and their families, and local workers who were in the war industries. The USO provided an outlet for social activity in Manchester that helped relieve the stress of war for military people and civilians alike. It seemed like nearly everyone got involved in one way or another, volunteering at canteens and dances, cooking food for free buffet dinners, raising money to pay for expenses. Many young ladies took advantage of the social scene, and some of them even met their future husbands at USO activities. Many people of all ages enjoyed concerts that were put on by the Grenier Field Band. And for local families whose sons and daughters were off to war, the USO provided an opportunity to help someone else's child who was away from home in service. The Manchester USO depended on the cooperation of several Manchester institutions, and you'll see many of these are the same national organizations that supported the USO. The YMCA, the YWCA, the National Catholic Community Service, the Jewish Welfare Board, the YWHA, which was the Young Women's Hebrew Association, as well as the Young Men's Hebrew Association, and others. The Knights of Columbus, Manchester Rotary Club, and other local organizations also helped out. Hundreds of local people of all ages and from all walks of life volunteered to help the USO, and they donated money to support the organization. The local community chest, which was the precursor to the United Way, also got involved in fundraising for the USO. Local businesses in Manchester did what they could to pinch in as well. Here we see soldiers from Grenier Field with their girlfriends at the Rex Theatre on Amherst Street in downtown Manchester. The owner of the theater, Lucien Descoteau, gave free tickets to 6 soldiers and their guests each Monday evening in cooperation with the local USO. They are shown here from this newspaper article admiring a poster of Gary Cooper in Sergeant York, which it is reported that they, quote, saw and greatly praised. The lead organization for the USO in Manchester was the YMCA. The Y was in charge of the United Services Organization Club, which was headquartered in the old Armory building on Pleasant Street that is now part of the Doubletree Hotel in Manchester and serves as a function space there. Although the Y was guided by the recommendations of the National USO, this was a local organization that depended entirely on the support of the Manchester community. This club facility was formally dedicated on Saturday, January 24th, 1942, and there were 2,000 people who attended that dedication. A newspaper article in The Leader said that the new structure was, quote, described by one speaker as the finest piece of USO physical equipment in the country, a building especially converted to meet the morale needs of nearly 3,000 Air Corps men at Grenier Field. The grand opening was said to be, quote, an important moment in the lives of the men who will use it the most. This building became known as the Downtown Uso and also as the Men's Club, as it primarily served the male soldiers, although many women soldiers also used facilities. The building contained a gymnasium, meeting rooms, a photography lab, hobby shops, lounges, dorm rooms, and reading rooms. The gym doubled as a hall and was the site of regular Saturday night dances, with a gala formal once a month. Band concerts, talent shows, and other types of performances also took place. On Sunday evenings, local citizens brought in baked goods and other home-cooked foods for the well-attended buffet for the service people. The club hosted an enlisted men's wives club, and the YMCA operated this facility with an army of volunteers and also provided other services at its own building nearby on Mechanic Street. As you can see, you could even take archery lessons here. This is an image of the newsletter of the USO Downtown Center from the end of January of 1945. At that time, it was calling itself the USO Club for Servicemen and Women. You can see that this club is celebrating its 4th birthday during the week of January 29th to February 4th of 45. The activities that week included co-ed social dancing, badminton, archery instruction, a girls' gym night, movie shorts, a basketball game of Grenier Field versus the Lowell Textile Workers, snack bar, and a special birthday event, the anniversary ball featuring a buffet supper and music by the Grenier Field Orchestra. The Leader newspaper in Manchester published regular articles that listed the activities of the various USO clubs. This article is from October 6, 1942. It lists the activities of the Men's Center, which was housed in the old Armory building. During this particular week, a soldier could participate in a variety of sports, including handball, badminton, and basketball, or he could learn photography or meet some of the local girls in an informal dance or the formal dance. There were USO organized outings to Crystal Lake, Mount Uncanunic, Hampton Beach, and Bear Brook State Park. Local women were assigned to be hostesses for the week. There were senior hostesses, generally who were older and mostly married ladies, and junior hostesses who were the younger unmarried women. A big program that week was a performance of Joseph Lorraine, who was an old vaudeville performer. His specialty was to perform minstrel numbers, bell ringing, and impersonations. Various committees were scheduled to meet, including a meeting of the Enlisted Men's Wives Club. Notices of the programs were also posted in the Beacon, which was the Grenier Field newspaper. Here you have an excerpt from the Beacon. The USO got involved in other ways to help the war effort. Here we can see a young group of USO junior hostesses volunteering at the Navy Recruiting Center in Manchester. Well-known entertainers and celebrities occasionally made appearances in Manchester as well on behalf of the USO, including the legendary vaudeville tap dancer Pat Rooney. In February of 1942, a variety show was held at Grenier Field with professional and amateur performers. 2,000 people were in attendance. The event was, quote, for the benefit of the Army Relief Society's National Charity Fund, used to aid families of men and officers of the regular Army who may be in need. Sporting events organized by the USO became important sources of entertainment for the residents of Manchester, as on various nights, the USO centers would host not only local leagues from Grenier Field, but also high school and college divisional play. These events drew large crowds and to cheer on their local heroes and forget the troubles of the war. Here we can see the 34th Air Base Squadron basketball team after their championship win over the 79th Bomber Squadron at Grenier Field. The games were played at the USO quarters at the air base. One area that I want to discuss that's an important part of what happened with the USO in Manchester is the African-American population that was served by the USO. The operation at Grenier Field brought many African-American soldiers to Manchester, which was a city that had very few Black people at the time. In fact, it's estimated that there were only 6 African-Americans living in the Manchester area before the war started. That's 6. Soon after the war started, there were 200 Black soldiers at Grenier. By the summer of 1942, there were around 300 African-American soldiers at Grenier Field. By December of that year, there were 400. Keeping in mind the time frame that we're looking at, it may not be surprising that some became concerned about how these soldiers were being treated and how to avoid conflicts between whites and Blacks. The Red Cross recommended that the USO in Manchester make basic services available to the Black soldiers and to also provide a few special events for them. In a November 1942 document, the local USO representative wrote, quote, Negro boys are now welcome guests at the USO club at which they have the opportunity for all personal services and all activities, except socials. That except socials clause indicated that the African Americans would not be welcomed at the local dances and other mixed social activities. Faye Lequier, who as a young woman was involved in the USO at the time, and this was one of the women that was interviewed about her experiences in the USO, she recalled a particular incident in which Black soldiers were dancing with white women on a crowded dance floor at the Armory. She was there with a date at the time. The other dancers quickly caught on and they rebuffed the soldiers. Lequier said, quote, one by one, they stopped dancing just because. That's a shame. I thought that was terrible. They stopped dancing because they didn't want to dance with the Black men. That's the end of her quote. There were many soldiers here who were from the South, which was likely an added factor in these tensions. The Manchester USO dragged its feet on the issue of race relations. They felt that the problem of providing recreation for the Black soldiers was a joint problem between the USO and the base itself, and that it should not be up to the USO by itself to solve it single-handedly. The Army at the time was officially segregated, and although Black soldiers were not prohibited from participating in USO activities in Manchester, there was a general understanding, unfortunately, that they shouldn't. The USO held dances for the Black soldiers on base for a while, but it could not afford to keep sponsoring these activities. What came out of this was that in December of 1942, the regional USO decided that it would sponsor a separate USO operation for the Black soldiers at Grenier Field that would be associated with the Manchester USO. The Black USO had a paid staff person, a woman who organized the activities, including busing Black women from Boston for weekly parties and events. This person reported to the special service officer on base, not to the local USO. This was highly unusual for the USO to hire staff that would be placed in a community, as this organization generally depended on local institutions to conduct the operations, just like the YMCA and other organizations that were doing that in Manchester. Excuse me. We see here Sarah Williams, who was the hired program director in charge of the Black USO at Grenier in the last years of the war. There were a variety of activities on base for the Black soldiers, including dances and outdoor recreation. There was a hostess house for visiting girlfriends and a guest house for visiting families. Weddings and other family events also took place on base. Here we see a dance that was sponsored for Black soldiers with what I believe is the Grenier Field Band. Here you can see images of people in the lounge on one of the guest houses, and then a group of women who were behind the guest house at the base. There were 3 African-American women volunteers who helped the director with the programs. 2 of them lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 1 lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts. The Black USO maintained some ties with the USO in downtown Manchester. This is a photograph showing Sarah Williams meeting with the members of the USO's Women's Advisory Committee in the guest house. So in addition to the operations organized under the leadership of the YMCA, there were other significant USO operations in Manchester as well. The National Catholic Community Service Organization organized a USO center that became known as the Women's Center. It was housed in a large house on Myrtle Street on the site of what is now the Mount Carmel Nursing Home. This club had activities for the male soldiers at Grenier, and it also had a strong focus on serving women, including Army nurses and other women soldiers who were stationed at Grenier Field. In this image from an article published on May 8, 1942, it is highlighted that Bishop Peterson, along with Commander Edmund Jewell, who was a leader in the Navy Reserve, and Lieutenant Lionel Boudreau, the chaplain at Grenier Field, were attending a breakfast for the center at the Carpenter Hotel. Here is a view of the Women's Center. This club was run by a paid director, Miss Rita Clark. In a December 1941 edition of the Manchester newspaper, The Leader, Miss Clark stated the intended objective of the USO. It was, quote, "The specific purpose of the club to maintain morale for the furtherance of defense. The recreational and social programs are integrated with a strong moral influence. It is hoped that when the defense program is over, we will return to normal life equipped to weave into the social fabric of the day the fundamentals of truth, of justice, and of charity." The Women's Center members, who were called the Victory Bells, operated several clubs, including an art club, photography club, a club for enlisted men's wives, and one for the local mothers of soldiers. It also organized outings, sporting events, talent shows, and events for children, an orchestra, glee club, a camera club, and an art club. The center held educational classes in shorthand and other subjects, including classes in good nutrition that was presented jointly with the American Red Cross. The women of the club got involved in war bond drives as well to support the war. The Women's Center also served the army of local civilian women who were working as defense workers. These were women who worked long hours in local factories on war-related manufacturing. They were essentially the Rosie the Riveters of Manchester. Here you see an advertisement for the Chicopee Mill, which made surgical gauze to support the war effort. The work of the Women's Club included putting on special breakfast gatherings for the women war workers of Manchester. The third shift worked from midnight to 7 a.m. The breakfast started right after. In this article from 1942, it is said that, quote, sleepy-eyed and a bit tired, 50 of them arrived at the USO Club about 7:30, a bit dubious as to whether it would be better to go directly home or to remain at the club. But after a tasty breakfast and the fun and relaxation offered by volleyball and badminton on the lawn, the use of the ping pong table and other club facilities, they began to pep up again and had such a good time that they remained until 10:30 a.m., then left for home and bed. The center also held evening events for the workers at different factories. This picture from October of 1943 shows a local girl, Private Edna Shaughnessy, being sworn into the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. That same week, the Women's Club formed a special club for mothers of Marines. Women recruits for the Women's Air Corps from around New Hampshire gathered at the Women's Center on May 12, 1944. The Jewish community of Manchester also organized a substantial USO operation. This photo shows ladies from the Jewish community in Manchester at a breakfast for soldiers at Grenier Field in May 1942. And this is an article about Charles Drescher, who became the director of the USO Jewish Welfare Board in January of 1943. This club organized socials at the YMHA, the Young Men's Hebrew Association building in Manchester, which was at 275 Hanover Street. There were games, dancing, informal entertainment, and refreshments. Mr. Drescher came to Manchester from New York City, where he had worked with Jewish welfare organizations there. In April of 1943, the USO Jewish Welfare Board and Jewish community in Manchester arranged for soldiers of the Jewish faith to participate in the traditional observance of Passover. Manchester families opened their homes to the soldiers, playing the role of foster parents to the young Jewish servicemen and auxiliaries in the Women's Army Air Corps. Occasionally, the Jewish and Catholic groups held joint events together. The war, of course, came to an end in 1945, and the USO operations were gradually wound down as the service people went home and the population at Grenier Field declined. The USO's center on Pleasant Street closed on July 1st, 1946. As reported in the leader, quote, every single day and night of the past 4.5 years, there has been free entertainment and refreshments for a GI Jill or GI Joe who lives in Manchester, who's stationed here or just passing through. The welcome mat was always out from 9 a.m. until 11 p.m. Since the war ended, the USO has also aided hundreds of veterans who, having benefited by this group throughout the conflict, still look that way for support. According to the center's director, Irwin Bud Davis, the three most popular programs at the center were first, the pop concerts by the Grenier Field Band, second, the Sunday night buffet suppers, where the local families brought in home-cooked food, and third, the Thursday night cabaret dances. The USO continued in Manchester after the war to serve the airmen who were stationed there during the Cold War era, on a much smaller scale, though, and without involving the local Manchester organizations. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Manchester Historic Association put together a USO history project several years ago now, with volunteers Nadine Bennett, Don McMahon, and Lorette Gendron, as well as some interns. The Oral History Project interviewed 6 women who had been involved in the USO in Manchester during the war. These women were Dorothy Gilmore, Faye Lequier, Peg Perotti, Ethel Chaput, and Mim Sprague, as well as Lorraine Reynolds. Mim and Lorraine were sisters. There was a lot of newspaper research that went into this, as well as lists of people who were involved in the USO. So I'd like to end the presentation by reading a couple of excerpts from the oral history interviews. One thing that came up several times in the interviews was the popularity of the Grenier Field Army Air Force Band in particular, also called the Grenier Field Orchestra. This was an excellent 28-piece big band that played at many dances and other USO events at the different venues. The band played both new tunes and old-time favorite hits in swing arrangements. Members of the band were versatile and sometimes performed as quartets and in other combinations, including a group called the Jive Bombers, and even played for square dances. There were also local bands that played at USO events. I mentioned that the Women's Center had an orchestra band as well, and there was also the Zaza Ludwig and Maurice Therian orchestras. One local girl, Dorothy Fisher, whose married name was Dorothy Gilmore, had a beautiful singing voice. Her contribution to the USO was to sing with the Grenier Field band. And this is an excerpt from the interview with Dorothy Gilmore. The question was asked to her, what was that like performing at the Armory? And her reply was, oh, I loved it. Oh, the officers, I mean, they were all professionals and it was terrific. We all more or less would know what we were doing because I never had a rehearsal. In fact, if I'd known I was going to be taped, which I didn't know anything about, it was on a little cardboard record. I lost it. They taped it just before it cracked up for good, so there's a lot of static. I would just buy sheet music, didn't matter if it was a real high key, probably higher than I should be doing. And I would just take it into them and they'd take a look at it. I would get up, I'd sing, they'd play, and that would be it. That was never rehearsed. They were good enough so that they knew what they were doing. Most of the time, I knew what the song was. Sometimes I hadn't had the words right during the performance. We didn't have time to handle it. Then the interviewer asked, now what was the audience's reaction? Were they sitting or that they were dancing? What kind of dances were they? And she replied, oh, well, when I was singing, they were slow dances. But boy, did I love the jitterbug. I was a good dancer. Some of those soldiers were terrific dancers. I had one guy swirl me around the whole armory. I was so out of breath that I thought I was going to have a heart attack. But boy, did we kick up a storm. I'm telling you, some of those guys were really great. And then I know I had done. We had archery. I remember one day I charged around with a bow and arrow. And we did some roller skating, some of that. And then she asked, do you want to know about the time we had a formal dance? The interviewer said, I would love to. She said, yeah, I don't remember. It must have been a special one. Maybe it was for the holidays or something, but it started snowing in the afternoon, but they didn't call it off. And there was a big group and they were all in army uniforms, all dressed up, and a lot of girls and a lot of soldiers. And when it got time, I think they decided to quit a little early because the snow never stopped and pretty soon nothing was moving. The cabs couldn't go. No transportation, but before the final end of the transportation, half of the girls set out, but half of them were able to go back in. The rest of us and half of them took my mother as a chaperone. And so we all slept on the floor and on the couches and in the chairs, and we slept and we stayed there all night. One soldier went up on the second floor with 5 and he brought down a few pillows and blankets and stuff, and it snowed all night. And it wasn't until about 10 o'clock the next morning that we were able to leave the armory. And I was supposed to be going to work. And there I'm coming home and my mother, she was in an evening gown. We get out of the taxi and go to the house at 10:30 the next morning. But that was real exciting. I thought it was wild. If they made me do it today, I would holler. My bones would be aching. The interviewer said, I wonder what the neighbors thought. And she said, I know, but I was with my mother and it couldn't be that bad. But that was quite an experience. I thought that was real exciting at the time. Another reference interview comes out of the fact that sometimes soldiers were confined to the base, particularly if they were about to be shipped out. The Army organized USO events for them on base. On Tuesday evenings, the USO hostesses could take the military bus from downtown Manchester to the base, where dances were held in a small hall for the men. This following story by interviewee Ethel Chaput is about her and some friends meeting some of these confined soldiers one day. So Ethel was involved in the USO, and the interviewer asked, did you go out with any of the soldiers? Ethel said, yeah, of course we did. It's funny because we used to go to Pine Island and rent canoes. And if they couldn't get out, the air base was bordered. The Grenier Field bordered Pine Island Pond. So we'd go to Pine Island, rent a canoe, and canoe over, and then we'd talk to them. You know what happened one day? It was a Sunday afternoon, and we rented a canoe, and I think there were 3 of us in the canoe, and I couldn't swim. They could, but I couldn't, and they wanted us to come up, and we'd stand and talk to them sometime, just in the afternoon, stand just there, just so they have someone to talk to. I'm sure, and my friend went to pull a canoe up, and it tipped over, and I was soaked from head to foot. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I wanted to come back. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? I went down to the bus, got on the bus, went home, changed. My mother wasn't home, fortunately. Went back, took the bus, and went back. That was our life. You know, when you're younger, you get silly. The next day, my mother said, how come your clothes are all wet? Because I left the wet clothes. And she was laughing in the interview. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the USO in Manchester and learned a little bit. And I'm happy to turn it back over to AARP. Thank you again for hosting. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
We do have a couple things that people have brought up. Somebody brought up Mary and Al. So I'm assuming you saw somebody you knew in the photos. And I don't know who that is, but I know my grandmother and my family was part of that back in the day, but I don't know what they actually did. I remember hearing about it through the family though. So if anybody wants to say who Mary and Al is, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll move on to Alan's question about when did Grenier Field close?
That is a good question. It closed as an Army base. I'm sorry, I would have to look up. I believe it's in the 50s, but I'm not entirely sure when it became more of a public airport.
Yeah,
I think certainly by the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Mary and Al was a message to me. Kat, that was Kat. Yeah. So anyway, Kat, you want to say something about that or no? But
anyway, was a sign in.
There you go. Yeah. Anyway, there was another question about is there any kind of collaboration between the Historic Association and the current Aviation Museum at the airport? Yeah. Yes,
we are good friends or organizational friends. We're both involved in a local New Hampshire collaborative called the New Hampshire Heritage Museum Trail that helps promote and promote each other, help move marketing. And we occasionally will do temporary exhibits. So we'll loan some items to the airport museum, and they'll loan some things to us, and we've done some collaborations like that in the past. And if you haven't been, that's a great museum. They do a lot of great things there.
That's very nice. Yeah, I have not been there, so I think it'll be fantastic to go see. Anyway, Mary wrote that she used to go to the Grenadier Air Force Base on Friday nights with her cousin. So were you dancing then, Mary? Yeah. Yes, she's nodding yes. Yeah. But I remember going to the Grenier with my family. We rented different places, and I think if you had a family member who was a serviceman, that you could rent out different places there, as well as we also rented out places on the Lake Winnipesaukee, as a service person, family member of a service person. So that was kind of cool too. But going to the Grenier was the thing, right, Mary? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of history in Manchester, and this is just one big piece that we don't know too much about. So we're very, very thankful to hear about it and there's lots of messages about thanking you for being, the whole subject was very interesting.
Well, thank you. We did enjoy it. It really is an interesting subject that I think has really been forgotten by a majority of the population. You just didn't know that this was going on. This happened during the war. It was a really big part of life during the war years for not only the military, but people who just residents of the city. Right. And did they go on to work with veterans? You did say a little bit about that. Some of the veterans. Yes. Yeah. Which is great. Yeah.
Well, then I'm just gonna, go ahead.
That's it. Nope, that's it. Go ahead, Kath. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to close out by saying thank you, Jeff, for your time and your expertise with all of us today, sharing it all. It's been a great presentation. And also thanks to our audience for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed learning about the USO in Manchester during World War II, and that you found value in the presentation that you can share with others. And of course, be sure to check the AARP New Hampshire website often. That's aarp.org/NH for more online programs such as Coffee and Conversation, Gentle Yoga with me, live cooking demonstrations, the Milliard presentations, and for upcoming in-person events finally. Yay! Be well and take care. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Somebody asked about whether the presentation will be available. You can get it online through AARP New Hampshire website. In probably a few days. It takes a while for them to upload it, but you can still see it again if you want. So there you go. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
There we go.